Okay, so happy 4th of July weekend, everybody. How are you doing? You good? I hope you got some good time with family and friends this weekend, maybe some good barbecue, maybe you got the chance to blow some stuff up, which is the American way, if you did it responsibly, of course. Although less blowing things up this year, it looked like. I don't know. Everything got canceled, so here we are. But it's good. I'm glad you're joining us today. Speaking of the American way, since it's been a big topic this week, and one of the most radical ideas that the founders put into the Declaration of Independence and eventually into the structure of our country was the idea that ordinary people should have direct access to power. No kings, baby. That's what we celebrated yesterday, the original No Kings rally, right? There shouldn't be an intermediary between you and your and power, you and your representation. No, there's no aristocracy you had to go through to get your voice heard. There's no gatekeepers who decide who gets in and who doesn't, that kind of thing. The whole experiment was built on the conviction that every person, regardless of their race and background or status, every person deserved direct access. Now, obviously, we've had a lot of hard challenges working all that out, but eventually that was the plan, right? That was a revolutionary idea in 1776. Most of the world was still organized around the assumption that ordinary people need some sort of intermediary for them, like someone higher up the chain who could represent them, speak for them, or approach power on their behalf. And most of the world organized that chain back then. They organized it by things like bloodlines and birthright. America had this crazy idea that we should elect those people, which I suppose cuts both ways. I remember joking with an English friend of mine about how ridiculous the royal family is. Like the stories you hear, the stuff that's on all the Harry and Meghan, all the things, right? Like how ridiculous their family is, the royal family is with all their scandals and all their stuff. And my friend responded, yes, but at least we didn't elect them. Touché, my friends. We choose our crazies now. That's how we do it over here. And I think that's better, but I'm not so sure. But this radical idea that we should be given better access to power actually shows up in our reading of Hebrews today that we're gonna jump into. And what the author of Hebrews does here makes the American experiment look actually kind of modest by comparison. We're not talking about access to government. We're talking about direct, unmediated, come as you are kind of access to the God who made the universe without any gatekeepers. And the reason that access exists and the reason it's so different from anything that came before it is actually what we're going to spend some time talking about this morning. Now, before we get into the text of that, I want to tell you why this matters to us at all, because you might be like, don't care, whatever, like, why does that matter? Let me just tell you, there's something that I have observed, and it's almost universally true about how people relate to God, and I want to be honest, I want you to be honest with yourself about if any of this describes you. So as I see it, most people relate to God in one of two ways. The first way is kind of how you relate to a parent that has a quick temper. So you approach God when you feel like you're in decent shape spiritually, like when the week has been reasonably good, when you haven't done anything you're too embarrassed about, when you've been reading your Bible maybe or praying, and generally you feel like you're keeping the plate spinning. You come to God when you feel like you have something to show for yourself, like I have been doing pretty well. And when the week has been a disaster, and when you've blown it in ways that you don't actually want to look at too closely, you go a little quiet. You're like, I'll get back to the God thing once I've cleaned it up a little bit, once you're a little more presentable. And I get this attitude completely. I approach going to my doctor's office the same way. If I've been eating poorly and putting on weight, I won't schedule an appointment with the doctor. Let me first lose some weight so all my labs come back looking good, and then I'll make the appointment. And I know this isn't ideal, all right? This is why when I last made an appointment for my primary care physician, it had been so long that they were like, Chris, who are you? And I'm like, yeah, you remember me? I used to come in there. They're like, we don't even have, well, let's see if we can find your record. Those of you who are in the medical field right now are squirming for me right now, and I get it. But that's just how some of us approach God also. The second way to approach God is to essentially keep your distance from him almost permanently. Like maybe you've never really felt like you had access to God in the first place, not in any real or personal sense. Maybe God exists, maybe he doesn't. But either way, he feels kind of remote, and you feel like the kind of person who doesn't quite have the credentials to approach him directly. Or you do it occasionally, or maybe sort of tentatively, like you're knocking on the door of someone's house when you're not really sure you're actually invited. A lot of us are there in that spot. We didn't grow up in faith. We didn't have it passed down to us in any way. We're very aware of how we've messed up things and all the messed up things that we've done. So we're like, yeah, I'm not sure about God, but I'm going to keep my distance just to be safe. And here's what both of those responses have in common. They both assume that God is sitting on a throne of judgment, and your job is to manage his impression of you like very carefully. That the access to him is conditional based on your performance or your status or your worthiness, that you need to earn your way into the conversation with him, or at least not embarrass yourself too badly before you show up. And the passage we're about to read in Hebrews 4, I think just kind of blows that whole assumption up. So let me read it. It's a little bit long. We'll put it up on the screen. We'll start with Hebrews 4. We've been working our way this summer through the book of Hebrews, just kind of going through it. And we'll start with verse 14, and we'll go through chapter 5, verse 10. Let me read it to you. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one in who every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. For every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He can deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness. Because of this, he is obligated to offer sacrifice for his own sins, just as he does for those of the people. And no one takes this honor for himself, but only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made a high priest, but was appointed by him, who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." And he says also in another place, "You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek." In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Okay, so look at what the author does right at the opening of this section. He says, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. And then immediately in verse 15, he says this, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. All right, I want to tell you one quick thing on the word sympathize, because in English it can be a little misleading. And I think it's worth taking a second just to kind of get it right. The Greek word sympathesai, and it is a compound word, and sim, which means with, and pathos, which means suffering or feeling. So put together, it literally means to suffer with someone. Now here's where it gets interesting. We actually have an English word that captures that meaning exactly. It's the word compassion. Compassion comes from Latin, com meaning with, and pati meaning to suffer with. So it's the same sort of construction, same meaning. It's just kind of built from Latin instead of Greek. But the word that sounds most like the Greek, sympathy, has drifted over time, I think, in our culture, into something that's a little thinner. Like in modern English, when you say, you have my sympathy, we usually mean we're feeling bad for someone from a comfortable distance. So when this verse says Jesus sympathizes with our weaknesses, I want you to picture compassion in the fullest sense, not this thinner modern word around sympathy. Jesus isn't up in heaven going, oh, that's just like too bad for them. Hang in there, guys. And he sends us a meme of a cat. Like he's actually in it with you is what the Hebrews author wants us to know. He doesn't just know about your weaknesses the way the doctor knows about a condition because they've read about it in a textbook. He knows it in the way that someone knows it who's actually been through it. And when he says Jesus was tempted in every respect just as we are, That's a big deal. Every respect, which means he doesn't observe the category of human struggle from a safe distance. He lived it. We would call this in today's language lived experience. He had lived experience. He felt hunger, and he felt exhaustion and grief and betrayal and the weight of being human in a world that is hard. He didn't put on humanity like a costume and walk around in it for a little while. He went all the way in on this. Now look at what the author of Hebrews says to do that, verse 16. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. So the word translated confidence in the Greek is parrhesia, and it's worth knowing because of what that word actually meant in the ancient world. Parrhesia was the right of a, listen to this, it's the right of a free citizen to speak openly and boldly in a public assembly. It was the opposite of a slave who had to measure all their words carefully, and they had to be nervous when they were around powerful people. When the author says approach with parrhesia, he's saying come with the confidence to God. Come to God with the confidence of someone who has been given full citizenship. And notice what he calls it. He doesn't call it a throne of judgment. He calls it a throne of grace, which means when you walk in to talk to God, you're actually not walking into some sort of like 360 performance review. Thank God, right? Corporate, where are my corporate people at? Yeah. Now, to really understand what the author is offering here, you need to understand what came before it. So in the Old Testament system, he's talking about priests and sacrifices. In the Old Testament system, there's a room at the center of the tabernacle and later the temple, this room called the Most Holy Place, or the Holy of Holies. And there's a thick veil, a curtain, and some accounts say that it's several inches thick, so a very thick curtain. And that it separated that room, that Holy of Holies, from everything else behind it. So behind that veil, beyond that curtain, was the presence of God. And exactly one person, the high priest, was allowed to go behind that veil into that room exactly once a year on the Day of Atonement with very specific rituals and very specific preparations in order to make atonement for the sins of all the people of Israel. One person, once a year, after this ritual purification. And if he did it wrong, he died, which is also not a good performance review. Like that's a little stressful, right? Like that's the picture of access to God that the original audience of this letter grew up with. God is far away. He's behind a curtain. He's hard to get to. And to get to him, you need someone to go for you. You need a mediator. And then Jesus dies on the cross. And the gospel writer Matthew tells us that the veil in that curtain, that temple curtain, is torn from top to bottom when Jesus dies. Not from bottom up the way a human would tear it, but from the top down, which God tears the curtain, which means the restricted access between us and God is over. So the rest of the passage, verse 1 through 10 of chapter 5, fills in the why this new high priest, Jesus, is able to give you that access. And we're going to spend our time on a couple points there unpacking exactly what that looks like. But before we get there, I want to mention one thing quickly. Verse 10 calls Jesus a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, which you're reading along, you're like, don't know who that is. Why did he bring in this other person? And you're probably thinking like, who's Melchizedek and why does it matter? We're going to actually dig into that in a couple weeks because when we get to chapter 7, it kind of goes into that more. So for now, just know that when the author says that, he's signaling that Jesus' priesthood, the way he is a priest, is completely different, and it's a completely different category from anything that's ever come before it. It's not a priesthood that runs like in a family line that has a beginning or an end. It's something older and higher and permanent. All right, let me give you 2 application points here, and then we're done. This is a holiday special where I'm going to keep this short today. You're excited. Maybe you can go blow something up today. We'll see. All right, number 1 is this. And there's a lot of things we could pull out of this text, but here's where my mind and heart went as I read this. Number 1, we need to receive the gentleness that's actually being offered. Here's the first thing I want you to take, and I think that maybe is a bit of a surprise to us. Go back to chapter 5, verse 2. He can deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness, is what it says. This is not for, God doesn't deal with the people who have it all together. It's not hard to deal gently with people who have it all together. But this says he deals with the ignorant and wayward, which is, if we're honest, a pretty good description of a lot of us at times. We just don't know, and a lot of times we don't care, and we're going to do what we want to do anyway. So let me ask you this question. If God deals with us gently and extends his grace, who in your life do you need to extend the most grace to? I'm guessing, and you may feel differently about this depending on how much shame you carry around, but I'm guessing the person you need to extend the most grace to is probably not yourself. Most of us are significantly more patient with other people's failures than we are with our own. Or actually, you do need to extend more grace to yourselves. I mean, I have a whole, I think we have a whole internal vocabulary for beating ourselves up that we would never use on a friend. If your best friend came to you and said, man, I really blew it this week, I'm ashamed of it, I don't know what's wrong with me, you would not look at them and say, yeah, you really did blow it. What is wrong with you? Right? You would be warm to them. You'd be generous. You'd help them see it in perspective. And then you'd go home and you would do the exact opposite of that to yourself. I'm saying this to suggest that the posture you extend to your best friend in that moment is actually closer to how Jesus relates to you than the posture that you extend to yourself. The author doesn't say Jesus tolerates the ignorant and wayward. He doesn't say Jesus reluctantly deals with them or processes them efficiently or manages them. It says he deals with them gently. God deals with us gently. The one who sustains galaxies and sits at the right hand of God is described here primarily by gentleness towards people who are struggling and lost and getting things wrong. And man, isn't that good news? Isn't that good news? What if it's true? What if God is truly gentle towards you? What if God is not angry all the time? Now here's where I want to be honest about this because I think this is where a lot of us get stuck. Most of us have no problem affirming that God is gracious and merciful. We know the verses. We've sung the songs. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. But I think what we really believe is amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like thee, not like me. What we struggle to do is receive it personally and specifically for ourselves right now in the actual mess that we're currently in. We can affirm grace as a theological category while just refusing to let it touch the specific thing we're most ashamed of. We don't relate to God being gentle, and then we just kind of beat ourselves up. This hits for me personally. If you ask ministers like me, what is one of the biggest challenges about this job? And you ask me that, I might mention lots of things like about people and how people can be difficult and measuring progress can be difficult or whatever. But in an honest moment, I have at times had this fear that there is grace for everyone in this room except me. Everyone gets God's grace except me, a guy that gets none because I really should know better. Now, I know that's not actually true. I'm just telling you where my head goes when things get dark for me. And Hebrews 5 is basically saying, stop, just stop. You have a high priest who has been where you are, who deals gently with people exactly like you, and who is not sitting on a throne of judgment, waiting to confirm your worst suspicions about yourself. The throne is a throne of grace, which means the entire orientation of the room that you walk into is toward giving you what you need, not evaluating you whether you deserve it or not. So here's what I want you to actually do with this. This week I want you to try something that might feel a little uncomfortable. I want you to talk to God about the thing you are most beating yourself up about right now, and talk to him with the same tone you would use talking to a friend about it. Not groveling, not like, I'm the worst. Just bring the honest, warm, like, hey, I really blew this, and I don't understand why. Bring that version to God. Because that's the version Jesus already knows about you anyway, and that's the version he deals with gently. You're not telling him anything he doesn't know. You're just finally stop pretending he doesn't know it. So that's point number one, is that God deals with us gently. And this is related to point number two, is this: bring him the hard stuff. So this builds directly on the first. Go back to chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. Let me put it up on the screen. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who is able to save from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. All right, I want you to notice what Jesus brings to God in prayer. He's not bringing the easy stuff. This wasn't a gratitude list and requests for a good day and safe travel and the general spiritual maintenance prayer stuff. This was loud cries and tears from the inside of the hardest thing he'd ever faced. The author, I think, here is describing Gethsemane, where Jesus is on his knees in a garden asking his Father if there's any other way, where he's sweating drops of blood, according to Luke's gospel, and he's in total anguish about what is coming. And he brings that to God, the full weight of it. And I think for a lot of us, that's actually a more challenging picture of prayer than we're comfortable with. Because most of us have been trained either by church culture or by our own instincts about what's appropriate. We've been trained to keep our prayers relatively composed. We bring God the presentable version of our struggles, the version that still sounds like we have some faith, the version that uses the right language and ends with, but your will be done, in a tone that suggests we're okay with whatever happens. And sometimes that's real and that's honest and that's good. But sometimes it's just another way of managing God's impression of us. And here's what gets me about what he says in verse 7. It says Jesus was heard. He was heard in the loud cries and tears, which means he was heard in that kind of prayer, like the desperate, I don't have my crap together kind of prayer. And that's not a lesser form of prayer that God tolerates until you can do better. It's actually the kind of prayer that gets heard. Like, it goes to God. Now, I want to bring in verse 8 here because I think it adds something important, but it's a little weird. It says in there, if you caught this, it says, he learned obedience through what he suffered. This is weird. Jesus learned it? Like he didn't know? Like, isn't he God? Doesn't he know everything? Sure. I think this means Jesus specifically and like experientially understands the hard stuff. The moments when faithfulness requires something from you that you'd really rather not give. When you're not struggling with like obvious specific sin, but with the specific weight of a situation that is hard and unclear and exhausting, and you don't know how long it's going to last. Jesus didn't read about the category of human experience. He lived it. He learned it. He experienced it. Experienced it in his body and his tears and his prayers. All of that in a dark garden where he prays. Which means when you bring him your specific kind of struggle, this thing that's ridiculously hard right now, and I don't know how much longer I can last, that kind of struggle, you're bringing it to someone who knows what that's like from the inside. So here's the path for this. I want you to bring to God the actual hard thing, not the easy stuff, not the routine stuff, the thing that is costing you something right now, the relationship that is draining you. And you have the opportunity to do this today. When you leave today, we're going to have prayer. We have people back on the platform back there to pray for you. Bring the hard stuff and say, could you pray with me, for me, to God about this? Bring it. Let someone in on that. The decision that's keeping you up at night. The thing you've been carrying so long, you've already stopped noticing how heavy it is because you've just been carrying it for so long. I want you to bring it, the the way Jesus brought hard things to his Father, without performance, without a bunch of tidying up, just the weight of it, honestly, out loud, to the one who learned what hard things feel like by going through them himself. I promise you, you are not going to shock God. You're not going to exhaust his patience. There ain't a thing you've done that God's like, whoa, I can't even believe that they would. No, it's not like that. You're not going to bring him something he hasn't already felt the weight of from the inside as someone who was also in flesh. And he was heard when Jesus cried out. He was heard by his heavenly Father, and I think that means you can be too. I would say bring the ugly cry stuff to God today. Y'all know what an ugly cry is, right? We got ugly criers in the room? You don't have to out yourself. I mean, it's okay if you do. So I'm not much of a crier. You're like, no way. Yeah. My wife would tell you that she can probably count on one hand the number of times she's seen me cry in 30 years. And probably 3 of those have been while we're watching war movies, and apparently those don't count. Whatever. That guy dies in the foxhole and you're not crying. I don't know what's wrong with you. Those count. So I guess I keep it buttoned up a little bit is what I'm telling you. I always tell her, I feel things greatly. It just doesn't come out of my face in water all the time. But my goodness, when we had to put our dog down, I ugly cried. My kids had never seen it. They were like, they literally like, Dad leveled up. The spit and snot crying. Unprofessional. Undignified. Unexpected bawling. I didn't realize how hard that was going to hit me. So whatever the prayer version of that is, that's the stuff I'm saying Hebrews is telling us. We can bring that to Jesus because he gets it. Because here's the thing about Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed. This is exactly what happened there. Jesus is in a garden on his knees, and he's asking his Father if there's any other way, and he's sweating drops of blood, which is what Luke tells us. Loud cries, tears, and tears, according to the author of Hebrews. The Son of God is ugly crying, undignified, unprofessional, unpolished. The full weight of what was coming was pressing down on him so hard that he asked for it to be removed if it's all possible. That's not like some great theological prayer with like a good beginning and end and saying all the right words. That's a man in all sorts of pain bringing everything he had to his Father. And his Father heard him. So this is why we're about to take communion together as a church, because communion, when we take it, the bread and the juice, this is in some ways the answer to that ugly cry at Gethsemane. Jesus brought the ugly cry stuff to God, and God didn't look away. God didn't tell him to clean it up. God heard him and met him there and saw him through to the other side of the hardest thing that anyone has ever faced. And what came out of the garden and out of the cross and eventually out of the tomb 3 days later is what's available to us on this table right now. The bread and the cup that represent the body and the blood. Those things are not rewards for people who have their prayers perfectly composed and like all together and who have gotten all their theology straight. Those are here for people who have been in their own garden and who have cried out of a place of need, who have brought the real weight of their lives to a God who already knows what the weight feels like. So you're going to have the opportunity to come forward today, out the left of your aisle, down the front. You can take the bread, tear it off, dip it in the juice that represents the body and blood. And when you come forward, I want you to come the way Jesus came to his Father in the garden, which is like whatever you're carrying, whatever the actual hard thing is, bring it to the table. Because the priest on the other side of the table isn't a distant guy who has never felt what you feel. He's the one who was in that garden before you were, who cried out before you cried out, who was heard. And because he was heard, you will be too. You don't have to hide from that God. You never did have to hide. So you're going to have that opportunity. If you don't want to take communion today, or this is new to you, or still processing all this, you can stay in your seat. That's fine. You also have a chance to give an offering. There are boxes there if you want to put your connection card in those boxes, or to let us know that you're here, that we pray for you, or if you want to give an offering, put it in those boxes. You come. But let's stand together. We're going to sing, and we'll have communion together.